Okay, so I want to talk to you about something that's been bugging me for a while now. And I think if you've been using or all of the, AI tools that are out there, whether it's ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, whatever, you probably felt this too, even if you haven't been able to quite put your finger on it. So have you ever been in the middle of a conversation with one of these tools and then caught yourself thinking like, wow, this thing is like really smart, like genuinely smart, like it understood what I was asking, it thought about it, it gave me a thoughtful answer, right? We've all had that moment to the point where we're pretty much taking it for granted. And look, I get it. I've had so many of these moments too. Like I use these tools every single day in our agency, every day, for brainstorming, for research, for drafting, image generation, for, all kinds of stuff. And sometimes the output is so good that you kind of forget what's actually happening under the hood. You forget that, well, it's not thinking. It's not thinking at all, really. And I think that's actually a really important distinction that most people in marketing and honestly most people in general are just kind of breezing past right now. So here's what got me thinking about this. The other day I was playing around with one of the newer reasoning models. And or with the modes or whatever it is, you've probably seen these. They're called things like, deep thinking or extended reasoning or whatever they call it. And the idea is that instead of just giving you a quick response, the AI, right, takes a minute or two or even further, and it shows you its thinking process and these little thought chains, and it gives you this more, in-depth considered answer, supposedly. And it really feels, impressive. It genuinely does. You see those thinking steps appearing on screen and you're like, geez, like it's actually reasoning through this problem. But here's the thing, and this is where it gets interesting. And I just asked it, literally, I just asked the AI, are you actually thinking right now? Are you thinking like a human? And you know what it said? It basically told me no. It said, I'm paraphrasing. That it's generating text based on patterns, that it doesn't have understanding, it doesn't have consciousness, it doesn't experience reasoning the way that humans do. You know, it told me this, like straight up. The tool itself will tell you this yourself. If you ask, go ask it. Go ask, are you thinking? Do you think like a human? Ask that question, see what the answer you get is. And, I think that's, it's kind of wild, right? Because we're all walking around acting like this thing is our brilliant coworker. And if you just ask it point blank, it'll tell you, hey, I'm just doing a very sophisticated pattern matching exercise. I'm not thinking. So the question becomes, and this is what I really want to dig into, why does this matter? Obviously, right? But like if the output is good, who cares if it's thinking or not? That's a fair question. I've heard people make that argument. But here's where my, experience starts to, question things. And I want to tell you what I've actually seen in practice. Because I think it matters a lot more than people realize, so we've got clients, right? We work with businesses across a bunch of different industries. And over the past years, I've watched this really interesting pattern emerge. The businesses that are using AI as a tool, like a really good power tool in the shop, they're doing great. They're saving time, they're producing more content, they're moving faster, everything's awesome. But the businesses that have started to, how do I put this, outsource their thinking to AI, you know, those are the ones that I'm worried about. And I'm seeing it more and more. Like here's a real good example. Like we had a client come to us, this was maybe 6 months ago, and they had been using AI to generate basically all of their marketing content, blog posts, social media, email campaigns, everything. And on paper, it looked great. The volume was incredible. The writing was clean, grammar was perfect, and it all sounded professional. But their engagement had completely flatlined, like just nothing. And then we dug into it. So the reason was actually pretty obvious once you saw it. Everything sounded the same, not just their content. It just, it sounded the same as everybody else's content, because here's the thing that nobody likes to talk about. When everybody's using the same tools with roughly the same prompts, you get roughly the same output. And it turns out that, well written and generic is not a good marketing strategy, and that's the fundamental problem with treating AI like it thinks, because real thinking involves something that these tools simply don't have. And that's experience. That's intuition. That's the ability to look at a market and feel something about where it's going, based on 25 years of, being in the trenches, having conversations with real people, watching trends come and go. You know, I was actually, and this reminded me of something that David Ogilvy wrote, like 60 years ago. He said something along the lines of, the best advertising comes from personal experience. And I think about that all the time now, because in the context of AI, these tools have access to more information than Ogilvy could have ever imagined, but they have zero experience, none. They've never sat across the table from a frustrated client. They've never felt the gut punch of a campaign that didn't work. They've never walked through, a store and noticed how people actually behave versus the data says that they should behave. And I think we're at this really interesting crossroads where right now, the marketing industry specifically is in danger of confusing output with insight. Does that make sense? Like, the volume of stuff being produced is going up dramatically, but is the quality of the thinking behind it going up? I'm not so sure it is. In fact, from what I've been seeing, I'd argue that it might be going down in a lot of cases, and probably more broadly than most of us even realize. So now here's where I want to be honest and check myself a little bit, because I'm not an AI doomer. I'm really not. I actually love these tools. I think that these tools are genuinely incredible. Like, the fact that I can now take a rough idea, throw it through, Claude or ChatGPT, and get a structured, draft in 30 seconds. Well, that's freaking amazing, for real. Like, it saves me hours every week. Our team uses these tools constantly, and we're better for it. And this is my stance, the value we add, the thing that actually makes marketing work, has never been the writing. It's never been the content production. It's the thinking. It's the strategy. It's looking at a business and understanding what makes them different and why anybody should care. And that requires human intuition, human experience, and human judgment that no AI tool has. Not today, at least. And honestly, I'm not convinced that the way these tools are built, that they ever will. Not in the way that it matters. And the extended thinking or reasoning modes, look, I know these might, ruffle some feathers, but I think those are largely a marketing play. And I say that with respect to the engineers building this stuff, who are brilliant, but calling it thinking or reasoning is kind of a branding choice, right? It's a marketing decision. It's designed to make you feel like the tool is doing something more human than it actually is. And it works, by the way, it totally works. I fell for it too, and you see those little thinking animations and you're like, oh, it's pondering my question. No, it's running a more computationally expensive version of the same pattern matching process. That's all it's doing. You know what I mean? It's just running it through more iterations. And you can test this yourself. This is something I actually encourage you to do on your own. Go to whatever AI tool that you use and ask it some questions about its own thinking. Ask it something like, do you understand what I'm saying, or are you predicting what comes next? Ask it something like, are you reasoning or are you pattern matching? Or ask it something that requires actual real world experience or intuition, like, what would you do if you were sitting across from a client who's about to make a huge mistake with their rebrand? And watch what happens. You'll get a perfectly structured, perfectly reasonable answer that says absolutely nothing that 1,000 other responses wouldn't also say. Because it can't draw on experience it doesn't have. It can't feel the weight of that moment. So where does this leave us? I mean, look, I think the answer is kind of simple, even though it's not what people want to hear. The businesses that are going to win in marketing, and frankly, just about everything, are the ones that use AI to do stuff AI is genuinely good at, which is processing, organizing, drafting, summarizing, analyzing data at scale. That stuff, incredible. Use it all day long. But thinking, the strategy, the creative instinct, the ability to read a room, read a market, read between the lines, well, that's on you. That's us. That's human. And I think if there's one thing I've learned after 25 years of doing this, it's that the businesses that try to shortcut the thinking part always end up paying for it later. I was talking to another agency owner about this last week, actually, and she said something that stuck with me. She said, the best thing AI did for my business was make me realize how much of what I was doing wasn't actually thinking. Let that sink in for a second. And I thought, wow, that's it. That's exactly it. Like AI is incredible at doing the stuff we're pretending was strategic work, but was really just, production, right? And now that the production is handled, you actually have to think. And some people are realizing that they, maybe weren't doing as much of that as they thought they were, which is kind of uncomfortable, but also kind of freeing if you lean into it. So I don't know, maybe I'm overthinking this. Maybe the reasoning modes are going to get so good that this whole conversation is moot in 2 years. I'm open to that possibility. But right now, today, based on everything that I've seen, my advice is pretty simple. Use the tools, use them aggressively, but don't confuse what they do with what you do, because the AI is not thinking. You are. And that's still worth something, and I'd argue it's worth more now than it's ever been. Anyway, that's where I land on this stuff. I'd be curious to know what you think. Like, genuinely, are you seeing this play out differently in your business? Because I'm always open to being wrong about this stuff. 25 years has taught me that, if nothing else.